One. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to 60 Feet 6 Inches, your fantasy baseball home over at fakepigskin.com. I'm your host, Kyle Robert. You can follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me today, once again, is Ben Rolfe. What's up, Ben?
Not much, Kyle. As this week goes on, I'm going to be slowly getting more excited for the Super Bowl when we do these podcasts next Saturday. I'm going to be trying not to get too excited because it's always bad if you get too excited for these things, isn't it? And I probably now am going to get a lot of abuse from people going, "Oh, typical Patriots fan doesn't get excited for the Super Bowl." I do get excited.
What I was going to say.
But I also watch the Super Bowl in a house with my sleeping wife and sleeping baby daughter, so you can only be so excited without waking everybody up.
Well, being a Patriots fan, it really is rough. You guys just got to be quiet while you just mercilessly march down teams' throats and win the game.
You don't understand.
Yeah.
You don't understand how difficult it is when your expectation is to at least win the AFC Championship every year. What that does to your heart, to your blood pressure. I swear the Patriots have taken 30 years off my life these last 3 years, and I'm not expecting any sympathy. I'm just pointing that out.
Poor baby. I feel so bad for you. Are you a little concerned with Donovan McNabb and Terrell Owens coming to town? Like, these Eagles scaring you?
I mean, I'm concerned about the Eagles. They're really good. They're a great team. If they had Carson Wentz, they would. I don't think they would be favourites because Vegas just make the Patriots favourites anyway. But I think they would. In my mind, they would be favourites because Carson Wentz was so good. The only question mark right now is how.
God, I feel like I'm listening to a Bill Simmons podcast right now. The Patriots would be the favorites. I don't care if Carson Wentz is there. I don't care if their left tackle's there. I don't care if they win 16-0. Just stop.
Look, we learned our lesson last week when every Patriots fan was as cocky as hell and the Jaguars scared the hell out of all of us. So there's no cockiness from me. I'm not.
But at the same time, I was sitting there in the second half and I was like, oh, the Patriots are going to win. Patriots are going to win. And I was somebody that was on the Jaguars to win. I was on the Jaguars +9. Well, that enough football talk. Just enjoy your Super Bowls. I'll be over here. I'm happy we got one playoff win for the Titans. Let's go. Okay, so we're back. We're going to continue our first base talk. If you missed the first part, we talked our top 9 guys at the position, talked about all those elite guys, talked about, kind of some of the spaces where Ben was a little bit different than I was. Obviously, up on fakepigskin.com, all of Ben's rankings, and they're all tiered out. He's got, basically first base, second base, all the positions, pitching, all that good stuff. So go check those out. If you think he's a moron, at BenRolfe15 on Twitter, yell at him, scream at him, tell him how wrong he is. But Ben, I think we were kind of mentioning this before we started, but I think the best way to utilize your rankings is if you disagree with like a couple names, then just move them and make them your own, right?
Yeah, I love hearing people's opinions. It gives me a reason to go back and look. I spoke last week on the podcast about Paul de Jong and someone commenting, I've got de Jong ranked wrong. What do you do? And I went back and looked at him and said, oh yeah, he wasn't quite as a short sample size that I thought he was. He actually played more than I thought. I love hearing it. It gives me a chance to write what I feel. I'm going to go into more depth with these guys as we get closer to the season. I just wanted to get some rankings out there for you guys as soon as possible so that we had something. What I'm going to do now is go back, I'm going to look closer, and I'm going to write articles, whether I do a rankings article where I break down every player or whether I just pick some players of interest. I like breaking down for you guys why I did what I did. There's nothing worse than just reading rankings and going, why is Abreu over Encarnacion? Like, why? And not understanding that kind of question. It's nice for me. I really want to see the comments. Yell at me on Twitter. I will respond. I will do what I can and explain to you why I've done it. If you don't agree with me, just move them. And that's how it should be. Don't just take rankings at face value. Don't take tiers at face value. At the end of the day, it's your draft and it's your happiness at the end of the year. I know from firsthand how miserable losing at fantasy in the playoffs can make you. It's fine. You can come and shout at me at the end of the year because you followed my rankings, but ultimately you're the one who's got to deal with that team. So adjust your rankings, do what you think is right, and then at the end of the season you can say, well, at least I drafted who I thought was right. You don't want to be sat there at the end of the season going, well, I wanted Abreu, but he said take Encarnacion over him, so I took Encarnacion. You don't want to be that guy. It's no fun. You want to be the guy that stands at the end of the year and go, well, I lost in my playoffs because Encarnacion wasn't as good as Abreu, but I took the shot.
Yep. And I think, using our rankings as a jumping off point is a great start, and then like adjust them. If there's a guy in Ben's tier 4 that you don't think is tier 4, move him down. If there's a guy that in Ben's tier 2 that you think is just as good as Paul Goldschmidt, move him up, and then you have your rankings and you can adjust. But at least it gives you a good point. You can kind of go from there, all that stuff. So excuse me. Let's get into it. I guess, Ben, my biggest question is, when you're ranking any position, how do you take guys that are kind of 1-year wonders or even half-year wonders? Obviously, Rhys Hoskins, Cody Bellinger, Justin Smoke, even guys that, we expect to be really good. Miguel Cabrera had the one bad year, came back and was incredible the next year. Obviously, we talked about him, fell apart again, so he's a guy that we're not, kind of penciling in. But I guess, how comfortable are you, looking at a small sample size as a half season, a whole season, and kind of extrapolating that when you're making your rankings?
So let's look at this from the two different points of view. So Miguel Cabrera is a bad situation where he struggled. What I'll do with him is I'll now go and look and see, is there something that might have indicated this? And yes, with Miguel Cabrera there is. He's a big old man, really. Like at some point the fall off was coming. Yeah. So that's why this year I'm not as bullish on him as I was last year, where I made the argument for top 5, top 2 even of the position. Cabrera might be top 2 at the position. He might be top 5 at the position, but there was indicators that last year wasn't a fluke, and that's important for me. And then you can turn that around and look at the good. So I've got Justin Smoke up. I've got his numbers up on my screen behind, and I look at his numbers and I see that he suddenly cut his K rate down from 33 and 26% down to 20%. And I look back at his career and I say, right, with the Mariners, when he was not as successful, but hit 19 and 20 home runs in 2012 and 2013. Mm-hmm. He had his K rate down around 20%. His ISO was up, not as high as it was last year. But again, his ISO is not a million miles away from what we've seen in the past. It's the average that's important here. And when the strikeouts come down, the average is going to go up. The BABIP's not a million miles away. I don't see last year as a massive fluke. What I see last year as being is a guy getting consistent playing time in an offense where he can go out and do this. And I mean, he's played for the Blue Jays for 3 years, so the park factor might not be a thing, but look at the run RBI numbers. He played 132 games in 2015 and only had a combined 100 runs and RBI. He got 126 games in 2016 and only played a combined 60 games. The games are misleading, and for these guys, I look at the plate appearances, and I realize that actually, if you double his numbers from 2015 up to 2017, which in plate appearances would bring him up to about the right number, you get 38 home runs. Mm-hmm. So suddenly I'm now looking at that going, right, that's not a fluke. And Justin Smoke actually should go above these guys like your Rhys Hoskins, your Josh Bells, your Trey Mancinis, these guys who haven't got the length of career behind him that he's got. It's very difficult for a journeyman like that to look at his numbers and try and take out the importance from not. I would take from that Justin Smoke was a defensive substitution, probably for Edwin Encarnacion, quite a lot late in games. So he racked up a lot of games, racked up a lot of waste of space at bats at the end of the game, or he came in as a pinch hitter. Again, that's not an ideal situation. He saw a lot of situations last year where he got to go up there and face the same pitcher 3 times in a row, and he benefits from that. And that's where I like these guys. That's what I go and look at. It's the same with Rhys Hoskins. I don't have that weight of knowledge behind him, so I'm going to treat what he did with a little bit more suspicion. Same with Judge. Same with Bellinger to an extent. I don't have that evidence to back it up, so I treat them with more suspicion than I treat Justin Smoke.
Yeah, and don't just take numbers and go, okay, he played 80 games, let me double everything and call that what his numbers are going to be for this year, because that oftentimes doesn't work. And a lot of times you'll see somebody come up, get 30, 35, 40 home runs in their 90 games or 130 games, and then somebody will extrapolate that, make that their number. Oh, they're going to hit 75 home runs. No, that's not going to happen. Odds are they'll hit around the same total in more games.
The other thing to read into this is also, in the case of Smoke, it's different because the games don't tie up with the plate appearances. In terms of if he'd played 126 games, you'd expect a lot more than 341 plate appearances.
Mm-hmm.
That tells me he's a defensive substitute, or he had pinch hit appearances. What you're looking for as well is don't get suckered into a guy who's a platoon player.
Yep.
There aren't a huge amount of examples in the first base list, but like Domingo Santana was a guy that originally was a platoon guy. He managed to make it work. Other people don't. So don't just think like Randall Gritcher. We talked about him. He now might play every day for Toronto. That might be a bad thing for Randall Gritcher's fantasy value because now he plays against the guys he's not very good at.
Yep.
So you've got to look at it and say, was the reason Justin Smoke only played half of the games because he was a platoon guy? In this case, no. So you don't worry about that. You can look a bit more at doubling those numbers up because he's going to be as good against both hitters, you can presume. It's that kind of element that you look at. You also look at who was keeping him behind. That all of that stuff is important. So the fact that Encarnacion was the guy keeping Justin Smoke out doesn't count against Justin Smoke. Encarnacion is very good.
So let's recap really quick. Ben's top 9: Paul Goldschmidt, Joey Votto, Freddie Freeman, Anthony Rizzo, Jose Abreu, Cody Bellinger, Edwin Encarnacion, Will Myers, Miguel Cabrera, Justin Smoke. My top 9: Paul Goldschmidt, Joey Votto, Anthony Rizzo, Jose Abreu, Freddie Freeman, Cody Bellinger, Edwin Encarnacion, Rhys Hoskins, Will Myers. So that's kind of where we're at. Obviously, Ben's rankings are up on the site. Under the MLB tab, there's an MLB rankings tab that will be updated very, very soon. Ben and I will put our rankings there. We will be able to update that as much as we, if we have a player move, if we have a trade happen, we will be able to update those rankings often for you guys. So you guys keep checking back there if you want to see where we're at when a move's happened. You can also hit us on Twitter at BenRolfe15, at NotoriousKRO. We're always down to answer questions if something big happens. And oftentimes, like it did with the Brewers, Ben or I or both will write articles on kind of our initial thoughts and all that good stuff. And then we'll be here on the pod. So we're here to break it all down for you guys. But Ben, I guess my big question for you is, do you have a name or two after your kind of initial 9 that you think has the ability, path, all that good stuff to make the jump from 10, 12, 15, 20, whatever it is, up into top 10, top 5 type conversations?
Yeah, the guy I really am intrigued by is Trey Mancini. Mm-hmm. He intrigues me just from the fact that we've seen a guy in Baltimore in a power situation be a beast. We've seen Chris Davis do it. There is precedent for it. And here's a guy I'd really be interested to see what he can do in a season where he's in there from the beginning. It all kind of flows for him. And he was good last year, 24 home runs. But they came in clusters. I think he can be better. I think we can see a guy who hits 30 home runs, maybe even more. He hit 290 last year. I don't see why that's not possible. He's always been a decent average guy. Here's a real interesting name to me, just simply because Baltimore, good, not great. They've got a lineup that is tolerable, but it's not great. And he can really be a figurehead for that. And it might be eventually he ends up playing first base. Again, as I mentioned on the previous show, I have concerns about Rhys Hoskins in the outfield. I do have concerns about Trey Mancini out there. I think he's got more experience out there than Hoskins got. But I still worry about big guys running around out there that, if they're not used to it. Another guy who does interest me is Greg Bird. I just think that Greg Bird has been, I don't want to use the phrase, but bad luck has gone his way a lot. It feels like every time Greg Bird is about to be Greg Bird, something knocks him back. And last year he played a lot injured, so I think you need to read more into the line than 9 runs and 170 plate appearances and a 190 batting average. I think you need to look further into it and look at the fact that he's hitting in a lineup where there's going to be a lot of run production, a lot of power. There's not going to be a lot of walking in that lineup. I think people are going to have to pitch at you because that lineup is pretty stacked all the way down. My concern with Greg Bird and what keeps him down in my rankings below those other guys that I like is is where he's going to bat. I do think he is going to get pushed down to 6-7 in that lineup. Whereas I think I can see by the middle of the year Mancini hitting middle of the lineup. I can see Smoke hitting middle of the lineup, and I can see Josh Bell and Hoskins all being in and around the middle of that lineup. That's why Greg Bird would be at the bottom of that tier for me, just simply because I don't think the weight of plate appearances will be there for him like it will for some of the others.
Yeah, no, Greg Bird is the name that jumped out to me, and I'm glad you brought him up. I think there's a lot of potential, as we were kind of talking about. Like, look at his at bats. Two years he's been in the majors. He has like 300 at bats, and he's got 20 home runs. So if he has that especially in this lineup, 25, 30 home runs, 80, 90 RBI. Like, I don't think that's crazy. I think that's a good risk I'd be willing to take. The average is a little questionable, but also coming off injury, he's struggled out of the gate, but hit 244 in the playoffs, which also isn't great, but better. And he spends the whole offseason getting healthy, and then all of a sudden ready to go for this year. I think he could be a value late. I'm with you. He's probably hitting 6th or 7th, which is not ideal, unless the Yankees get crazy and then throw him in the 2-hole, and
Yeah.
or maybe bump everyone up. But I don't know. I mean, like the Cubs put Rizzo there, so I would be shocked to see, Sanchez or Judge or Stanton hitting there. I mean, I don't know that it's that crazy, and then all of a sudden he's hitting 5th, so you never know. But Greg Bird was definitely a name that jumped off the page to me. Another one is and I'm gonna be a homer. I don't care. I like Buster Posey. This is a guy that I think is going to be in a much stronger lineup. We joked about it in the free agency podcast, but there was literally times where they were playing with basically creative players hitting around him and, leading off, playing in the outfield, doing all this stuff. Just adding Evan Longoria and Andrew McCutchen around him, I think it's enough to kind of get him in that conversation. I don't think he has that top 5 upside, but I think he can do enough between the average and the RBIs and the runs and 20-ish home runs to be in that conversation from, like, say 8 to 12.
Yeah, what pushes Buster Posey down in my rankings is the decline in home runs. He's gone from 19 to 14 to 12.
Yeah.
And you don't, like I say, you don't need monster power at the position to succeed, but you need something, and that's nothing to me relatively.
Yeah.
The average is good, but the average at the top end of first base now is so much better than it was. Like when it was Miguel Cabrera and then a load of sort of 250 hitters, it felt like a few years back before we saw the Goldschmidts, the Vottos, and the Freemans really come to the fore. It felt like first base was a power and low average. Now it's balancing out a bit, and also it's because they might be hitting for similar averages to what people were a few years ago, but 260 is actually now a decent average in the major leagues. And if you have a guy that hits 260, you're not doing that badly. It's when you get guys that hit 220 that bottom you out. That's my concern with Buster Posey. I have no issue with you taking him, but I also do laugh in your face if you take Buster Posey and play him at first base. Because if you take Buster Posey at the value you're taking him and you play him at first base, you might as well just, go
Yeah,
home.
no, and honestly, like, I'm with you. If I'm drafting Posey, I'm playing him at catcher. But we're talking about in the conversation, in the context of first base, and it makes sense to kind of compare him because he is a guy that seems to be transitioning more. And would it shock me if in the next 2 to 3 years the Giants are playing him at first base only? No, it wouldn't. So it's
can the power come with him to the position?
Exactly. Well.
Point. I'm 100% behind Buster Posey. Like he moves up towards the top 10 for me because that average becomes so much more important. Those doubles become so much more important.
Yeah.
He gets points from triples. It just all of a sudden becomes that much more impressive. So I definitely think you value that, but just be careful is what I'll say in Roto, because he will leave you deficient at home runs, and you can find power elsewhere, but you don't want to be leaving yourself 20 home runs behind everyone else at a position.
Oh yeah, and luckily for us, we'll give you some names that have power potential. But yeah, I think I think he's a name to watch, and I call me a homer. It's all good. I want to talk about a couple of matchups of guys that I think could be interesting if you're debating in drafts. And the first one is Josh Bell versus Will Myers. Obviously, if you look at Ben's rankings, Will Myers is 8. Josh Bell is 12. Will Myers is in the third tier. Josh Bell's in the fifth, but that's because Miguel Cabrera, as we talked about in the last podcast, is kind of in a tier by himself just because there's so much upside but so much downside with him. I guess Ben, what if you're taking Will Myers over Josh Bell, say they're in a similar round. What's the differentiation? What is the thing that makes you sway Myers' way as opposed to Josh Bell?
It's 100% speed for me. I
Yeah.
think they're pretty much a wash for home runs. Neither of them are in a great lineup. I argue now that actually Myers is in the better lineup of the two, which is kind of crazy considering where we were last year. But it comes down to speed. Their average, again, is fairly similar. It's just that with Myers. It's just that a 20 home run first baseman, it's not as rare as it used to be, but it's so rare, and it's such a benefit. If you've got a nice balance early on, to keep being balanced and not have to go one way, I don't feel like Josh Bell excels at anything. And that's my concern. He's quite good at walking at time from time to time, but he's not great at anything that really helps you majorly in roto. So that's my problem with Josh Bell. I think that I've ranked him in that tier with the Mancinis, with the Hoskins, with the Smokes, with the Birds, because I really think he is a guy that can develop this year, and that intrigues me. And it wouldn't surprise me if we're looking at a 35 home run line and a 270, 280 average from the lad. But for now, it just worries me that he didn't. He did well. He went from 3 home runs in 152 plate appearances to 26 in 620. That's a good increase. It's, can he now build on that? And if he can, that's what I want to see.
And so you think he has 35-ish home run upside?
I like to think with the jump we saw last year, he has.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of these guys where I'm not sure it's a fluke. He is one of these. I would consider him a one-year wonder because what he did the previous year was so blah in terms of it gave us a nice little feel, but it wasn't anything. But if you do that extrapolation thing and you take it from 150 out to 600, he should have only had 12 home runs last year. He hit 26. He more than doubled that extrapolation, and this is why you can't just extrapolate because it just doesn't work like that.
Yep.
But did he sacrifice some of that on base that he had in the previous year for the power? And if so, is that going to be a growing trend? That's what I want to see this year. That's why I think Josh Bell has the potential to develop. I'm not sure enough it will be this year. If this year he goes up to those 30, 35 home runs, then definitely next year he's going to be right in that top 10 conversation. And if some of those guys in the top 10 are dropping a bit, he's going to be in the top 5 conversation, because if that power is there and he can get that average back to 270, can he combine them? That's the key thing. That's my concern with Josh Bell.
Yeah, no, and I'm looking at his isolated power. And last year he hit 211, and the year before he hit 133. So that's that power jump that you saw. Kind of somewhere in the middle seems pretty fair. Like Fangraphs the depth charts and Steamer have him about 188. Fans has him at 198. So yeah, 180, 190, somewhere in there. So maybe he gets 25, 26, around the same home runs. But if he could bump up that average, I don't know. I'm a big fan of his. I think there's a lot of potential. I like you mentioned, that lineup is definitely seen better days. But Polanco, Starling Marte, it's still got some heat. I like to see where he is. He's a guy that another guy. We were talking about guys that could jump. I think he's in that conversation. The other names I wanted to talk about were guys that we only saw for a little bit, but both are gaining a lot of steam. Obviously, Rhys Hoskins is a guy that people are losing their mind over. They're in a lot of people's top 10s. Obviously, 18 homers and 48 RBI in 50 games will do that. But the other name I think is interesting, and I wanted to kind of get your feedback on, is Matt Olson. 59 games last year, hit 24 homers, but only 45 RBI. I guess is he a guy that you're kind of targeting and or just kind of keeping an eye on this season?
He's definitely a guy that intrigues me, and actually, I'm now looking at it and saying, well, he had they had similar amount of plate appearances, 216 v 212.
Yep.
They had identical averages, 259. They runs and RBI similar-ish, but it's power that stands out to me. He hit 6 more home runs than Rhys Hoskins did, and that is interesting to me. And I'm wondering if I've done Olson a disservice, but I think in my mind it's that Oakland versus Philly kind of thing. I don't want my power hitter in Oakland because I don't feel like he can break out with the A's. I just feel like that park is going to suppress him, and in a way that's silly. We've seen people succeed there before, but there's just something about Oakland and hitting that just doesn't fill me with confidence that he can repeat what he did last year.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen him have power in the minors. We know he can do it, and but we also know the average can bottom out in the minors. And we saw in his first, it was only 28 plate appearances, but less than 100 average. That's kind of the downside with Matt Olson. I don't feel like he's there with Rhys Hoskins. I feel like Rhys Hoskins' floor is safer. I feel like they've both got very similar upsides. But this year, I'm going to take Rhys Hoskins, but I'm going to target Matt Olson late. Let's call him my Chris Carter.
But see, I think Olson could be interesting because I think you could actually. I think we're talking about these players, and in terms of numbers and production and all that stuff, they're not that dissimilar. So if you are able to get Olson, I think several rounds later, and kind of same amount of upside you just said. Obviously, Olson has a little more downside.
Mm-hmm.
That's why he goes as late as he does. But when you have that potential, I mean, I would rather take something else and then take my shot on Matt Olson a little bit later. The two numbers that jump out to me that kind of scare me off is Olson's K rate. I mean, last year in his 59 games, his 216 appearances, 27.8 K rate. That's not good. Projected for about 25, where Rhys Hoskins in his first year was 21, but he has the ability to hit 20, maybe even 19, maybe 18. And then you also look at his walk rate, where Hoskins was walking 17%, even if that comes down a little bit. And Olson was walking at 10%. It goes up a little bit. Hoskins is going to strike out less. He's going to walk a little bit more. So there's obviously a little more, a little better patience at the plate, a little better batting eye. But Matt Olson's a guy, I know he's in Oakland, but it's kind of like the Cleveland Browns. Like, you can't just write off every Cleveland Browns player because they're on the Browns. So don't write off every A's player just because they're on the A's. With Olson and Chris Davis, this could be a nice little sweet spot of the lineup.
In my next ranking, Olson is definitely going to jump up into the Carlos Santana, Buster Posey, Matt Carpenter, Justin Bour tier.
Mm-hmm.
I tiered him with Joey Gallo because I saw them as the same guy, and I think that's a disservice on Matt Olson. He is better than that. I think he has the potential to hit at that 250 mark. I don't see that from Gallo, not this year anyway. I actually think when you look at the projections, I think Steamer has done him a bit of a disservice because they're only projecting him to improve to 31 home runs while they're projecting Rhys Hoskins up to 36. And I think that's a little bit of a disservice on Matt Olson. I think he can put up similar numbers. I just think if I was going to bank on one to have a 270 average, it would be Rhys Hoskins. If I was going to bet on one to be 220, it would be Matt Olson. That's probably the difference.
I do wonder, though, with their projections so do you think, like, when you're doing projections, you kind of put your numbers together. Do you think there's a scenario where it's either like 15 home runs and a really bad season where Matt Olson, it just doesn't work, or it all comes together in his 35-ish home runs? Or or do you think there's a kind of in between? Like some of these guys, I feel like it's either gonna work and it's gonna click and they're gonna be awesome and they're gonna approach 40 home runs, or it's gonna fall apart. I don't know if these teams kind of just have their two range of outcomes and kind of find a spot in the middle, or if they project kind of what they actually think is going to happen.
Yeah, it's difficult. I tend to just I like to say I use 3-year numbers and put them in. So that's why my numbers will depress Matt Olson a little bit because they'll see more out of his 2016 than they'll see in Rhys Hoskins because there's also that he's never failed aspect. Matt Olson felt like he failed in 2016 because he hit so low. His BABIP was insanely low. That was a similar problem that we had for someone else we were talking about was an insanely low BABIP that's going to come back up. You would expect. Yeah. That's the thing with Matt Olson. I just think that you're right. I feel like Matt Olson's bad side is Joey Gallo. I feel like Matt Olson's bad side is that 40 home run, 200 average kind of guy. I think he's got that power. Mm-hmm. Maybe let's strip it back to 30 to 35 range because of the parts. But that is what I see. I can conceivably see what's been projected for Matt Olson by the fans on Fangraph, which is 36 home runs and a combined 200 runs and RBI if it all clicks, because he seems to have the talent to do it. It's just, do Oakland believe in him enough this year to go from him being a 216 plate appearance, 60 game guy to being a 160 game guy? And if they do, is there a risk they trade him middle of the season and he gets in a worse situation? I think a big part of it is that Rhys Hoskins plays in a major market relatively in Philadelphia. Matt Olson doesn't. And I think that is what differs here. And I think that's something you can ride in your fantasy drafts. It's not just the name of the player, it's where they play.
Yeah, and I think the A's are smart enough where I don't think they're in a position. I know they typically will be a lot more platoony and understand, okay, the better opportunity, this, that, and the other. I think they realize Olson's really talented, though, and I could see them, even if he struggles a little bit in April and even into May, letting him kind of ride it out and kind of figure it out. They know they're not contending for anything this year, so I could see them being pretty comfortable, even when he goes through a couple slumps, just letting him ride it out. So we talked to Joey Gallo. I think Joey Gallo and Justin Bour, like if you're digging deep, are probably two of the best names. If you're just, oh crap, I kind of avoided power early and I need to try and cobble it together. Is there any other names in that kind of vein that you think are worth like taking a shot on? I know Carlos Santana's a guy that now he's in Philly. Maybe his numbers get a little bit of a bump. Even digging deeper, Yonder Alonso. Is there anybody kind of in that vein that you're thinking, man, if I need power a little bit later in drafts, this is going to be the name I jump to?
So Eric Thames is going to be a guy that I take a gamble on just because we saw what he can do. Joey Gallo, my concern is that he's being really drafted quite high in NFBC. Like, I'm just looking at their ADP, and he's going off the board after Miguel Cabrera and Travis Shaw. And you're taking a lot of the upside out of it there. You're gambling on the fact that he's going to pull his average out of his ass, and that isn't what I see happening. So there's a concern there. I agree with Justin Bour 100%. I think that's a great power target late in drafts. I think he's a really underrated guy. I don't know how the universe, so to speak, the fantasy universe, is going to treat Carlos Santana and Matt Carpenter when we go into drafts, but they are 20 home run guys who don't necessarily bottom out your average. They hit 250, 260. Matt Carpenter can be better than that. We know he can, but they're guys that can give you average 20, 25 home runs at the end of a draft. Shouldn't destroy your average. Could hit 270 kind of thing. They're not bad shouts if you want a nice balance, definitely.
What about Mitch Moreland? He's another guy that just kind of, I'm looking at your full rankings, and he's a guy that kind of popped out to me. In Boston, do you think he's got more opportunity to keep kind of going?
I just don't know where he's going to hit.
Yeah.
Because if they're signing JD Martinez supposedly at some point, they're not going to bench Hanley.
Yeah, so he
Hanley's
could.
not going to play the outfield. Mitch Moreland could be the odd man out, and I know they want to give him more time. But if so, why are they pursuing Martinez if he's not going to play an outfield position? I don't see them bumping any of those three guys in the outfield. So this is my concern with Mitch Moreland is just I struggle to project him for any more than 125 games and what comes with that. And I can see a lot of that. I can actually see him topping that game numbers, but I can see him topping that as a defensive substitution late in games.
Yeah.
So I have my concerns about him there. But if he did get at bats from 125 games, so to speak, full time at bats, I can see a 20 home run season. I can see it, and I don't hate it. And another guy that just comes out similar numbers to him is Wilmer Flores in the Mets, because he's going to play a lot of different positions, and he could be another 20 home run guy in potentially full playing time. So they're both interesting names, but they're probably guys I'm staying away from. They're probably more AL and NL only at this stage.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting. Obviously, as you mentioned, JD Martinez is still out there. Eric Hosmer is still out there. You could see some shakeups. Maybe Moreland or some other guys end up getting moved in parts of deals. So make sure you are checking that out. Obviously, it's still January. We're just getting the ball rolling. We love talking baseball, and obviously you guys seem to be enjoying the content we're putting out, so we wanted to keep it going. As stuff happens, we'll be able to update all the rankings, all that good stuff for you. Ben, is there a guy, anybody else that you're in the back of your head thinking, well, if things break right, this could work out, or this is a guy that I plan on drafting? I mean, we saw Ryan Zimmerman just come out of nowhere and be incredible last year. Finally stayed healthy. Like, is there anybody that you're kind of thinking could do that, or that you're like, this guy is a guy that I'm going to try and get as many places as I can, just because I think good things are going to happen for them?
So some names outside of the rankings that kind of jump out to me. Stay away from Brandon Bell.
Yes. Yes.
Let's stay away from Brandon Bell.
Do it.
Jose Martinez in St. Louis. Jose Martinez, he interests me just from a point of view, if we don't know what we've got there, it'll be interesting to see. Ian Desmond gets to hit with the Rockies. Yep. Had a bit of he's an injury risk, but he's a power speed guy, and if he plays a full season, 2020 in that park, not out of the question. Ryan Zimmerman, interesting, but I think you could see him usurped by Matt Adams at some point. I've touched on Eric Thames. Chris Davis, be interesting to see if there's a bounce back coming there. I'm not convinced. And another bounce back guy is Adrian Gonzalez. It'd be not drafting him, but it'd be interesting to see how he starts the year, whether he locks down that first base job. Ryan Healy in Seattle did well in Oakland. He's gone to another big park. My only concern there, batting low in the lineup. If he can come up the lineup a little bit, then I'm definitely interested in him then. The other names to watch out for are Albert Pujols, who is currently DH only, but rumoured he's going to play first base to make space for Ohtani. I don't see it. I don't see that Ohtani's a good enough hitter that they'll risk injuring Pujols, but he's definitely a name to consider drafting to fill that util spot with a view to maybe playing 5-10 games in the first month and getting some time like getting your eligibility. That's definitely an interesting name for me. I'm gonna start going deeper in tiers once we have our rankings on the site. I'm gonna go down to at least 30 at the infield positions is my aim. So a lot of these guys, you'll see them appear. Eric Hosmer, I don't know what to do with at the moment. I don't really value him from fantasy point of view because I don't think he has enough power. That's my concern. And Yuli Gurriel falls into the same category. So they're two guys that will probably appear in my top 30. But they're kind of, I'm probably actually on draft day going to take my gamble on some of these other names I've just gone through who have your 25-30 home run upside, or your Ian Desmonds who have your power speed combinations.
Yeah, Gurriel's definitely a guy that I like, but we just really have to see how these rosters kind of shake out. And if there's no playing time for these guys, they have to have the counting numbers in order to be able to play. The other name that I'm interested in that we kind of talked about in the free agency for NL was Dominic Smith. You hit Gonzalez, and I was a big Gonzalez guy last year. Obviously, injury bug is never been a guy that dealt with it. He's an older guy. I'm really curious to see how he bounces back. But if Adrian doesn't bounce back the way he kind of, most people, or at least the Mets want him to, Dominic Smith could get the call come May, come maybe even as late as June, and be a guy down the stretch that actually makes a big difference for your fantasy baseball team. So he's a guy that if I can grab him late in drafts and stash him, and I don't have to worry about anything, I'm definitely going to be doing that.
Yeah, that's a good call. I'm probably not drafting him. Like you say, NL only, maybe you'd consider it, but I'm probably not drafting him just because I don't see playing time. I'm not 100% sure I see him being on the opening day roster,
Yeah.
but he's going to be a guy I flag early on in the season. He's going to be a guy I check my news feed first thing in the morning. Well, first thing in the morning for me is very different for you guys, but first thing in the morning for me is about 5 hours before you guys check your news feeds. But I'm going to be just having a look, keeping an eye on it in those early hours just to see if the news is breaking that he's being called up. And if he is, I think I'm going to get him added, even if I sit with him on my bench while he's on their bench. I want to take that risk. I actually think he's the kind of guy that when they call him up, he will play.
Oh,
Just simply because they're not going to call him up to sit him on the bench and watch old man Gonzalez swing and miss. They're going to call him up to play. If he's not in the majors, it's because they want him taking regular swings in the minors.
Yep.
If they call him up, they're going to play him, I think. So if you see him called up early in the season, get him on your roster. I don't know how the service time things work, but it's definitely a guy to keep an eye on.
Yep, it's spring training will be very telling for the Mets, and if Gonzalez is struggling, and he might, if there is a non-zero chance that Gonzalez gets cut before the season even starts, that Dominic Smith is your opening day first baseman. So like I said, he's probably gonna be a guy I'm gonna be targeting, and being comfortable sitting him on my bench. But we'll have to pay attention as it gets closer. All right, Ben, this was a lot of fun. It was good chatting first base. We'll be back next week to break down more positions, as well as the long-awaited catcher pod with Damian Dabrowski. We got that in the works. No one hates catchers more than Ben, and no one loves catchers more than Damian. So, we'll sub Damian in for this podcast. We'll go real deep, talk about your two catcher leagues, all that stuff. Ben will have to deal with any of it. He'll be kind of like his baby, just puking in the hallway, and everything will be golden. So for Ben Rolfe, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.